Now, when it comes to this tradition of Aussie grit, there's of course one man who springs to mind, Andrew Twiggy Forrest. I caught up with him at his Minderoo Foundation in Perth. Andrew Forrest, first up, I just want you to explain to me, for somebody who has never been there, just describe the Minderoo station to me, the Forrest family home.
It's a property of now a bit under 1 million acres. It's obviously the great Australian outback. It's very isolated. It's semi-arid desert in places, and it's beautiful, almost forest in places along the banks of the Ashburton River. It's exactly as the country was over geological time, and we have a very deep love of the place, like the local Indigenous share with us that passionate love.
Tell me about your earliest memories of Minderoo. What were the earliest things you can remember? You were literally out in the middle of Australia, and you had to be resilient. The whole family had to be resilient.
You don't stick around the bush unless you've got a deep love for it. And so I always felt I had colourful people around me. It takes a child to be brought up by a village to get anywhere, and we certainly had that village. Most of the families were Aboriginal, and all my sisters and brothers' friends were 100% Aboriginal, and it was just a fantastic childhood. And yes, you were really isolated, and that built up a sense of endeavour, a sense of independence, and sense of determination, because you know, when you're out on your own and you've got to get home and the sun's setting, and there's only you to rely on, you develop a sense of absolute determination and independence.
One influence is your great-great-uncle, Sir John Forrest.
Yeah.
Now, one of the great Australians, an Australian treasurer, the first Premier of Western Australia, a man who himself was an explorer, a pioneer, there's no doubt, and with his brother Alexandra, some of the great treks with literally Aboriginal brothers alongside them as they survived in the outback. You're mightily inspired still even today by his tales, I understand.
He's part of those cultural values. The value of always having a crazy brave plan A, but a bulletproof plan B. To me, what I found most inspirational is that when he was a really young man, I mean, half my age, he headed out straight into the middle of the great unknown, the middle of Australia, with this ambition to try and join these colonies up into one country for the first time. The East and the West were like different countries. And he'd either fail and we'd stay colonies for decades, or he'd succeed and he'd provide the inspiration to the coming nation that we could come together as a country.
So how difficult was it after being at Minderoo, this is where your family is, this is where your extended family is, to then leave that, to go to the city, to go to university, to literally become a city boy? Is that a difficult thing? Because I'm trying to get to the inspiration, to where the drive is coming from at that stage.
I'd gone to university, I'd passed, which was miraculous, and I'd, instead of taking a year off before university, which a lot of kids do, I decided to take a year off after university. Did the whole mustering for the sheep mustering, the cattle mustering, the shearing, and then decided to head down to Perth and see if I could actually crack a job in the city. Eventually, after weeks of walking up and down the terrace, I did go and see a guy called Frank Magnus, and said to him, "Look, I've got these ideas, I've got this energy. I'm happy just to be your slave, make your cups of tea, anything. I'm a smart kid. I work hard, and I'm happy not to be paid. Just give me a crack."
So, okay, you're now in the stockbroking fraternity. You learn basically the art of a deal. I guess that's part of the key. But you also learn how to raise money through the stockbroking lessons, don't you?
I started life as a research assistant.
Yes.
So researching companies, writing for the Elders Weekly, and putting out investment recommendations of BHP and Bell Group, and started to back entrepreneurs. In my research writing, I wasn't that good at the figures and the spreadsheets, but I was good at sensing people, and I began to follow entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial companies, and that got me a following at quite a young age. That this kid's recommendations tend to turn out okay, and I was probably one of the first analysts to say, I'm not backing the numbers, I'm backing the people.
With a solid business foundation under his belt and with that famous forest pioneering spirit, Twiggy set up Anaconda, a mining company that would take a new innovative approach to building the Murrin nickel mine. The venture relied on new technology and the construction of a new gas pipeline, but it didn't all go to plan.
So we took a punt that that pipeline would be built and that technology would work, and we'd stitch these two before pretty well unknown technologies, we'd put them together. And if we could do that, then we could create one of the world's largest nickel and cobalt companies, which Murrin has been ever since and still is now.
And yet that ended up as a complete disaster. You and Glencore fell out famously. You ended up getting pushed out the door. Again, a little bit of motivation is here as well for you, isn't it?
Yeah, look...
I mean, you got paid out, let's be honest.
No, I got $3.5 million, which I put straight into a new organisation called the Minderoo Foundation. That was the very genesis, that public execution and a payout of $3.5 million, which went straight into the start of a new charity, which eventually became the Minderoo Foundation.
How much is in the Minderoo Foundation now?
About $2.1 billion.
Incredible. Just amazing. From that, however, we then move forward, and because from there comes Fortescue.
Underneath our feet, there is literally billions and billions of dollars of iron ore, and we can turn that into a company itself worth billions of dollars.
I'd always believed that it was an errant injustice that the country I grew up in and used to ride all over with my family and forebears was slowly becoming more and more restricted. We weren't welcome in these vast tracts of land which were owned by BHP and Rio. You began to get the impression that locals who'd been there for 100 years before anyone had heard of these companies would need a passport just to ride a horse over their own country. And so I was annoyed by that, and I began to think, well, hang on, what have they got which no one else has got? And it was a railway line and a port. And I thought, well, yeah, that's very, very hard, but it's not impossible. And so we set out acquiring an enormous amount of land, which was prospective for iron ore, which they'd written off. We'd made applications of all this country. Everyone was ignoring those applications. They were legitimate, proper, legal applications, but getting totally ignored. So I said to the government, I'm going to enforce the law against you, against everyone.
Twiggy Forrest's Fortescue Metals Group says the company has engaged senior counsel and will commence legal proceedings.
That made me unpopular, but it also forced the government then, at the time, to apply the Mining Act to BHP and Rio, and of course they lost those tenements. We picked them up, and we started to plan a railway line. The more we planned this railway line and applied for the port and said to investors around the world, trust us, we're going to find the iron ore. You know, we've applied for port and railway lines. This is a huge area. We will get there. You may as well at least put some shekels with us, just in case we do.
And Chinese steel mills at that time were interested in trying to break the hold that BHP and Rio Tinto had on iron ore production in Australia.
Yeah, Chinese weren't really taking any notice of us until we got to about a $200 million market cap, and that was then enough to be able to say to Japanese and Chinese steel mills, look, you should take a bet on us to at least give us an order. The Chinese, who were new to the game, said, yeah, we don't mind offending a BHP and Rio. Fair's fair in business, we'll give you an order. And with those orders, we're able to build up more and more credibility. Of course, since then, Chinese and Fortescue's had a healthy respect for each other.
The other thing was also the rail line itself. You, of course, lobbied, went to the High Court to try to get access to BHP and Rio Tinto's railway lines to get iron ore to Port Hedland. But in the meantime, you'd simply gone ahead and built probably the most significant piece of rail infrastructure that has been seen in Australia for many decades, and you did it almost in record speed. Just explain that.
We'd seen the lobbying power of BHP and Rio. So we were really concerned when we went to apply and get all the approvals to develop a railway line. So we created a very big diversion. And that big diversion was us getting on their track. That mesmerised those two companies. BHP and Rio just looked at us as this ferocious interloper who was just going to try and get a free ride on their hard-won infrastructure, and took them all the way to the High Court over it, but that allowed us to have a pretty well a free rein, without their lobbyists against us, to go and apply for and develop our own railway line.
Go Australia!